Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks to you, to the ICD. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be in Berlin, to have this opportunity to talk about a topic which is extremely important in today's world, in a moment where Europe is trying to strengthen its capacities to be a global player, in a moment where we live through difficult times of economic and financial crisis, in a moment where, of course, globalization is also globalization of threats, not only globalization of opportunities. So, importance of security, importance of prevention, importance of global strategies. In this moment, talking about the future of NATO, talking about the future of transatlantic cooperation in the field of security is more important than ever. Security and foreign policy are the main fields where political guidance and strong political leadership are needed. Why? Because these fields impact on the core of national sovereignty, and defending citizens and their security is and should remain a top priority for all democratic governments. So, on one hand, states in NATO and the EU shouldn't run the risk to underestimate serious, multi-faceted and asymmetric threats on all of us in the rapidly changing world. But on the other hand, by showing leadership and better public communication capacities, states and multinational organizations should explain that money spent for preventing and facing threats is not wasted, but invested for the good of our citizens. This is why, not only in my country, but I think in the majority of the countries, of the democratic countries, there is a perception in the public opinion that money spent for security is money wasted, that we have to cut, we have to reduce, we have to withdraw our capacity to be a player in the field of security. This is a political mistake. Leaders have the duty, the moral and institutional duty to explain to the public opinion why this is not true. So, on this point of security and perspective for global cooperation, the first political key principle is multilateral cooperation. This is the principle number one. If I think of NATO, it is very clear that financial burden for capabilities should be shared reasonably in the near future between European and American allies. And it is necessary for we Europeans to work even more towards a complementarity rather than duplication by making full use of existing pooling and sharing and smart defense initiatives. These two initiatives have been launched from EU and NATO recently and focus on better cooperation, optimizing the use of resources rather than promoting overlapping and duplications. And these are extremely important operational tools. So we need a political decision on better spending rather than cutting horizontally defense national budgets. We have to focus on some priorities. What happens very often, it is matter of fact. It is a mistake, but is a matter of fact. It happens. Very often, national governments tend to cut horizontally chapters in the budget on defense. Why? Because it is much easier than taking a political decision on deciding what to do, where to cut, and where to invest more. This is a political decision. It is very easy to cut horizontally by 3% or 4% by uncoordinated decision. But this leads to weakening the capacity. This is why I said at the beginning, this is a political point, not a point to be reserved to technocrats or to bureaucrats. What are the political priorities on that? In general terms, European allies, and I speak as an Italian, as an European, should avoid to consider that just representing a soft power would be enough to play the European indispensable role as security provider. I'll be a bit blunt. We cannot run the risk to be seen, we Europeans, as the soft power appendix to US strong security producer. We cannot be the consumer of security at expenses of United States security provider. This is the reality. We have to be very frank. The most important political goal in the future of NATO and in times of economic crisis is for NATO to better involve European partners by encouraging coordinated political choices on where we can cut. Think about static spending or not interoperable areas, and where, on the contrary, we need new and fresh investments. Think about new technologies. Think about cybersecurity. We have to invest more, not less, on these important fields. And we have to reflect also on how to better organize a division of labor among allies. It is a matter of fact, again. I realized as Italian foreign minister in Afghanistan, we had at our disposal a good number, an excessive number of warplanes that were practically useless given the characteristics of the territory of Afghanistan, and not enough helicopters. Why? Because there had been uncoordinated decisions, and we found need for helicopters and warplanes unused because they were unusable. We realized to have, in the majority of member states of the alliance, particularly in Europe, big number of ground troops. Ground troops are mainly unmovable, while we need in that moment rapidly deployable troops, rapidly deployable units, because we are not in the risky situation on the territory of Europe to keep enormous number of ground troops on the territory of Italy, while it's necessary to deploy a smaller but rapidly deployable group of troops in Lebanon, when Italy is having 2,000 soldiers, or in Afghanistan, more than 4,000 soldiers, or in the Balkans, in Kosovo. So this is the importance of a political decision rather than simply cutting or going ahead horizontally or bureaucratically. The second point where we have to make a choice, And more in particular, we already indicated areas where we started to pool resources. There have been some steps forward, important steps forward. Think about common projects on smart munitions. There have been common initiatives. Think about military satellite communications. There are some projects that have been implemented now of good cooperation. And there are also areas where we already share capabilities, not only projects, but already we are sharing capabilities on important areas. I mentioned air refueling initiatives, air policing initiative. Italy is providing air policing support for Baltic states in the framework of NATO. Italy has been promoting air refueling cooperation during NATO initiative in Libya recently. There are practical cooperation initiatives. And I think in this area, we got important positive results in terms of scale economies and optimizing resources that are available to the partners of the alliance. But there is very important third priority. And the priority is the one to guarantee better access to common capabilities. There are important initiatives that are being discussed within NATO and European allies. But a key issue is how to guarantee, and this is another highly political point, how to guarantee once a national political decision is taken that each member state of the alliance effectively provides a predetermined capability after receiving notice that this is required. In my view, this is a clear point, because there are very often decisions to put at disposal of the alliance a given capability. At the due moment, when the capability should be used concretely, we need again another political decision, a new confirmation. We take time. So we should have a political agreement that when and once a given state decides that that capability is for the alliance, decision is taken once and for all. This is the point. Otherwise, we leave alliance in the uncertainty situation on the concrete implementation of a political decision on capability. How to achieve that extremely important goal? Well, I think one first step should be a political national strategic decision where in each state the government involves the parliament, taking after that the commitment to keep once and for all a given asset available for the alliance, except in the case that a new opposite strategic political decision is taken. Today, it happens exactly the opposite. A political decision is taken, but a confirmation is needed for each case of concrete use of the capability which is available. So the alliance cannot count on the availability of the assets and capabilities. This is the problem. I would imagine reversing. The parliament and the government decide. The state has decided. When a given state is decided, it takes a commitment before the alliance. Before the alliance, that commitment cannot be, I would say, vanified, cannot be changed suddenly. This is the point. I understand perfectly that this is a very political agreement to be reached. But there is a second step, equally necessary to me, is to agree among the allies who is responsible to somehow certify what is made available and by whom. Sometimes it happens that a state declares the availability, but nobody certifies that this is effectively available and what is the capability concretely usable. There is nobody having that kind of responsibility. My idea is that, again, it is not a very easy issue. It's an extremely difficult issue, but I think, for example, NATO and for Europe, European Defence Agency should have on this a key role to play, at least on certifying the concrete availability of assets and capabilities by members of the alliance. Understandably, some partners are reluctant, but so far, the system to use common assets was based, exactly because of this, on redundancies on some capabilities and deficiencies on others. And this is what will have to change towards transparency, efficiency, optimization, also to avoid, to discourage further investments on the needed assets. There is another issue at stake if you want to adapt to the evolving global security context, and this is how to better cooperate with private industrial sectors on defense and security. This is another key. A first step is, to me, how to improve our procurement systems, where, particularly among European allies, fragmentation and duplications are many cases that are largely more than collaborative programs. We look at the situation in Europe is extremely fragmented on this. We should think now of pooling and sharing production alongside procurement. The existing fragmentation duplicates production and leads to different standards of equipment. And this is an even more serious mistake, so hindering the development of logistic support systems and weakens military interoperability, which is a serious problem affecting the capabilities of the alliance as a whole. Europeans should, again, to improve private-public cooperation, quickly implement a European common market on defense after the adoption of important European directives and the strengthening of European Defence Agency that go exactly in that direction. What I mean, we created, as one of the most important historical achievements of Europe, European Common Market. The sector of security and defense industry has been excluded so far. Now, The time has come to include in the European common market perspective defense and security industry. How is it possible to go ahead with United States negotiations to have a common trade, free trade, transatlantic space without including in that security and defense industry? Simply unthinkable. This would be another extremely important political step forward. There is another key issue at stake. The issue is how to strengthen and promote NATO partnerships. NATO counts on a number of members of the alliance, but it has been developing partnerships. I think we should invest more on partnerships. One, I think, of the most important strategic imperative is for our alliance to build a globalized, flexible, and rapidly reaching network of partnerships. This is equally important for Europeans and for American allies for some good reasons. First reason, evidently, major threats come from outside what we used to call the transatlantic space. So we need reliable partners that are strong players in the regions where threats are originated. It is absolutely clear that many regions in the world are unstable, are fragile regions where security problems originate. But fortunately, we have partners that are good players, important players there. And secondly, on partnership, we have to protect common goods from cybersecurity to sea lanes of communication or energy supply routes to stabilization or failing and failed states. There, allies and partners have this good in common, and so a common strategy is needed. If I think about some friends and partners we have in the Gulf, I think they share with us concerns on how to prevent from a cyber attack or from terrorist infiltration. And this applies to African partners or Asian partners or even partners we have with NATO like Korea or Australia. They share common values, talking about democracy, respect of human rights, and common threats. So I think of Asia and Pacific, or Africa and the broader Middle East, we need to rely heavily on partners to globalize together our response to the crisis. This is a problem, this is a point where I see a possible evolution and integration of the core mission of NATO in the future. NATO should evolve in the near future towards a stronger involvement of partners. How? First of all, by contributing to enable them to become stronger providers of security. We need targeted education. We need training and mentoring projects that should be a key element of this strategy. Think about what happens now in the north of Africa. Think about the fragility of Sahel. Think about what I used to call the arc of terror, ranging from Yemen penetration of terrorists to the Horn throughout Sahara Desert or sub-Saharan Africa. Think about what happened in Kenya with the attack of Shabaabs that are making unstable and fragile and not under control the situation in Somalia and want to destabilize countries like Kenya that cooperate within the African Union alliance to stabilize the region. How is it possible not to cooperate stronger with these partners to enable them to become stronger and stronger? It is not possible to have the idea, I would say, of NATO being a global COP. We cannot be everywhere in every time. We have to rely on our partners. This would enable members and partners to better develop together a comprehensive interoperability to the benefit of initiatives like NATO Response Force, where rapid and coordinated action is needed. For example, I mentioned just this example. We don't have yet shared standards on cybersecurity and the prevention measures. And this is a problem. Not having a common shared standards on how to prevent and react in case of cyber attacks makes all of us weaker. And we have to take, as soon as possible, cooperative countermeasures. If I think about my recent experience in Mediterranean, in Northern Africa, in the NATO action in Libya, I remember very well for the first time after what I can call an historical decision taken by the Arab League, a number of Arab states were cooperating not just politically, but operationally with the NATO initiative in Libya. It was essential. It was necessary. And what about the cooperation with other regional organizations like African Union that I mentioned? This is why if we look at the areas where security issues originate, we have to have more cooperation, more and many more reliable partners of our alliance. Cooperation with partners on counter-terrorism and counterintelligence should be deepened, starting from special forces cooperation in a more comprehensive approach. I would imagine in a very near future initiatives to promote with our partners in these important regions of crisis or instability, initiatives of concrete cooperation among special forces to experience together interoperability. This is extremely important. Since prevention strategy became and will become more and more crucial, we could think of involving partners in each of the world's regions of our interest, for example, on the threat assessment exercises. Now, there is our own threat assessment and their threat assessment that often don't coincide. And this is a problem. if we have to work in the region. We have to encourage regional organizations to participate, so providing the alliance with a more comprehensive and regional-based, and I stress this point, regional-based evaluation of a given situation of threat or crisis. On the involvement of partners, the alliance should count and rely on the experience and the added value represented by member states themselves, particularly Europeans. We have a role to play on the involvement of partners when it comes to some priority regions, namely Mediterranean, Middle East, or North Africa. Europeans are, in this framework, again, a crucial pillar of the alliance to indicate and develop with their neighbors and partners a comprehensive approach to conflict prevention as well as post-conflict strategies. When it comes to that, I want to say in our alliance we need more Europe, not less America. This expresses my point of view, being very enthusiastically pro-European. I think Europe and America should cooperate as loyal partners, in a sense that a stronger Europe is in the interest of our American friends. This is the key point. Sometimes we have been using to consider strengthening Europe as a counterpower, counterweight to the United States. Nothing more wrong. Absolutely wrong. I think when it comes to Mediterranean, recently, during a G8 meeting, President of the United States has asked to the Italian Prime Minister, to my Prime Minister, that Italy takes the lead on stabilization Libya. Because it's our neighborhood. We know better than others how the tribal system in Cyrenaic or in the southern western mountains in Libya is structured. And this is natural that we do more than countries that know less than us on that strategic region that can be and should be stabilized for the stability and the security of the Northern Africa. It is normal that US is asking its partners to do more, not to do less. We have been criticizing the American unilateralism, and rightly so. When there is now a multilateralist approach to our cooperation, we have to do more, not to do less. So we were right in asking for more multilateralism. Now multilateralism came. It put on our shoulders more commitments, not less. This is something Europeans have to understand if you want to have a vision, because otherwise we follow the events. And this is not possible. A last point on the evolution in the concept and in the vision of NATO. I think after 2014, with the withdrawal of combating troops from Afghanistan, will happen, is that NATO will be evolving to not purely military organization. It has been seen as a purely military organization. We have to change our approach, especially if you want to strengthen our partnerships in some regions where the idea of military organization is not so well received. I think about the Arab world, the Arab people. This is why I think in the future of NATO, I would imagine a stronger role for involving civil society. Why civil society shouldn't be involved in consultation or discussion with NATO? Why NGOs should be excluded from possibilities to be heard, to be consulted, when it comes to stabilizing Libya or trying to find a way forward in the Horn or in Somalia? Is it possible to ignore that in many cases these represent civil society and can bring to us, to the alliance, some more added value than in the past? I can understand it will not happen overnight, but we have to have a vision in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years of our alliance. Europe has been experiencing cooperation with civil society. NATO much less. It's time to change. It's time to have some, I would say, new initiative also on this important field. My conclusion: if you want to have and implement a vision for the next 10 years, 15 years, once my Chinese colleague, the foreign minister of China, the former one, once he told me, Franco, you talk about 2020 European strategy. We think about 2050 strategy. And maybe we are a bit shy because in China there are those that will think about beyond 2050. It is true. We cannot have a next 3-year strategy. We have to think about the future. What is the future to me? Is to think about how to build a new transatlantic bargain. I think there are some promising perspectives and a common awareness on the relaunching of our transatlantic community, which was born and has always been based on common values: democracy, rule of law, protection of human rights. A new transatlantic community should be based on a broader concept on one hand, a new transatlantic security bargain where Europeans and Americans share the burden and the opportunity to be both providers and not just consumers of security. On the other hand, I think of a transatlantic new economic common space, starting from the visionary perspective opened by President Obama's proposal to negotiate a US-EU trade agreement. A highly political complementarity exists to me between these two pillars, since both require political choices and vision, since both require mutual trust, and both have an economical impact. Vision and preparedness are more effective and less expensive than reaction in case of crisis. This is why, in times of crisis and in times of multiplication of global players, Euro-Atlantic broader cooperation is more necessary than ever. As I said before, we need more Europe. Many of you will know I'm a partisan of United States of Europe. I'm partisan of a political, not just an economic union, to be stronger allies of America, to be more reliable partners of America. But our cooperation cannot just be based on the preoccupation that America looks at Asia, at the China, at the G2, United States, China. It depends on us to make that alliance stronger, I would say, and more credible than in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Frattini. And if I could ask you to remain on the stage for a few moments, we'd love to give the opportunity also to take questions and comments from the audience. But also just from my side, I could not agree with you more in terms of especially the need to try to somehow reawaken the transatlantic relations, which in many ways I think is not really working as effectively as it could. I wanted to ask you one question before I give the microphone away. As you discuss, let's say, this new vision for NATO in the future, again, I couldn't agree with you more that it really is about smart power. So it's not just this hard power tradition in many ways in which NATO was built, but really also the soft power component that one needs to somehow exercise more. As you also said, in partnership with the private sector and civil society. Let's assume that this were a strategy that were implemented, let's say maybe even as early as next year. What would you see as the main obstacles? Let's say really from the leadership point of view, if it was clear this is the new strategy in terms of really more civil society, more smart power, soft power, what would be the main obstacles that you think might come your way as that new strategy were to be implemented?
Well, thank you very much, Mark. I think the main obstacle can be represented by, I hope it will be not the case, lack of political leadership. Because if things and evolution will be led by technocrats, by the bureaucratic construction, by technical reflections and not by highly political decisions, there we will have a problem. Only if political leaders will understand changing means sometimes putting on the table some shocking proposals. I can understand when it comes to involve civil society, there would be those thinking about the purely military background of NATO, saying, it has been never the case, why should we change? Because if we don't change, we don't have a vision, and the civil society and the public opinion will go ahead much faster than politicians and political leaders. We cannot run the risk to be overcome from the civil society because we are too slow. Sometimes, and I think about European reactions, we have been slower than the public opinion would have required. And this is why European Union project has been running the risk to lose part of its credibility to the eyes of public opinion. Why so many populists? Why so many Eurosceptics? Because public opinion have the impression that Europe is low, bureaucratically trapped, and incapable to deliver, incapable to put on the table a serious problem, a serious program with value for money. This is necessary. And the same applies to the alliance. The same applies to NATO. What happened in case of the Syrian crisis? International community as a whole, international organization in a stalemate, giving the impression that the world is incapable to put an end to the carnage in Syria. All these elements lead me to say I can understand only if there will be political leaders. When more than 60 years ago, my compatriot Alcide de Gasperi dreamed European defense, common policy. He did so. He failed because of some, I would say, difficulty with the other founding fathers, in particular our French friends. But he had a vision more than 60 years ago. And the vision included defense and common security and foreign policy, not just prosperity, not just economy. And this is the same for NATO. If we don't have strong leadership saying civil society is an essential component, should be involved, while talking about institutional building in Northern Africa, it is necessary. Otherwise, we have not complete picture of the situation, how it is, how it should be.
Thank you very much. I want to give the chance now, even though I have many more questions, to give you a chance to ask your questions. I know you're going to be picked up by the embassy for an interview in 10 minutes. So what I'd suggest we do is maybe take a number of questions together and then give you the chance to respond. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right, now I'd ask you as always to please introduce yourselves when posing the question. Keep them brief if you can, and that will allow for as many voices as possible to be heard.
I will try. Thank you, Mr. President Frattini. My name is Mamadou Kone. The last point you mentioned was the most important point for me, cooperation involving the civil society. That was the most important point for me. Now, my question is, can't stability be achieved without arms race? Because I've seen that you have favor security by trying to arm or by trying to reinforce the defense system. How would you, second question, how would you quantify the place of dialogue in conflict management before and after conflict management?
Can you repeat the first question? I didn't hear the final phrase.
Okay, the first question is, can't stability be achieved without arms race?
Arm.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
My name is Sergei Ponomarev. I'm from Russia, Moscow, and I want to ask you just one question. In what way do you see the relationship between NATO and Russia? Do you think nowadays Russia is a rival for NATO or it's a partner?
Thank you very much for your presentation. A very short question. How would you balance the question of cross-continental cooperation and security with the issue of individual freedom? How much are we going to sacrifice our individual freedom in the name of security? Thank you.
Sure.
But maybe I should just ask one, because it's
Please.
related. Yeah, I think for many of us, we have seen NATO as more an instrument of war than an instrument for peace building and peacekeeping. So I don't know, how would you account for the past years? Is NATO an instrument for peacekeeping truly, or is an instrument for war? And could you answer the question within the context of post-war reconstruction?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Very interesting questions. On the civil society, I think first of all, there is a general trend in international community on disarmament. This is the best way to help peace and stability. Countries are ratifying the International Convention on Conventional Arms. Countries are implementing and those that are not implementing yet will be, I hope, implementing convention or non-conventional arms. I think disarmament, in principle, should be one political priority for all democratic states. And this contributes to perspective of stability and peace, of course. It is not an element which is disconnected from the role of civil society that I mentioned, because NGOs, civil societies, organizations tend to be promoters of disarmament, promoters of peace and stability. When I mentioned the importance of consulting, of having a thorough vision of the issues at stake in a given region in the world, particularly in the crisis region, I had in mind exactly the contribution civil society can provide to an organization like NATO in the field of paving the way for stability, paving the way of better living condition in the post-war and post-conflict situation. This is why I said, and I repeat, this is not incompatible at all with the core mission of NATO, because linking to the other question, the last one, I don't see NATO, as I said, as a purely military instrument or organism. I would rather consider NATO as an essential contributor to stabilization in the post-conflict situation, or I would say helping building or rebuilding institutions like what NATO is trying to do now in Libya, and even more in the future. Think about the experience of training and mentoring NATO missions. These missions are important. And after 2014, with the withdrawal of NATO troops from Afghanistan, we will have to consolidate the experience of NATO mission initiatives of training and mentoring. And the same applies to countries where we, I would say, consider the high risk of deterioration in the security situation. Think about the problem in the Horn, the problem of piracy, the problem of drug trafficking, which is linked to terrorism and international terrorism. In all these areas, NATO should be a political player rather than a military player. It has been in the past seen, as you said, as a mainly instrument of military action. But it is time to explain, so we need much more and much stronger public diplomacy for NATO to explain what is the mission of NATO, because I give you the experience of Italian contribution to NATO. In the framework of our cooperation in Afghanistan, in the province of Herat, the Italian civil cooperation has been working hand in hand with the Italian soldiers under NATO flag in the province of Iraq to build the infrastructures, to restore decent economic situation, to promote developing small and medium enterprises there. So, depending on national decision, it is possible under NATO umbrella to organize initiatives to cooperate with the civil society on the ground. And this is what we should try to strengthen in the near future. Particularly, we will have the opportunity to, I would say, follow the institution building in Afghanistan after 2014. We cannot lose that important challenge in Afghanistan. Well, NATO-Russia, as you know, Italy has been the promoter of the historical achievement to bring together Russia and United States in the summit of Pratica di Mare. I was there 2002 as Italian foreign minister when the President of the United States and the President of Russia decided that a NATO-Russia Council should be created. It has been created. It works below the expectations. It's, I would say, slower than expected in discussing issues and getting results. NATO does not consider Russia an enemy. We would like very much to have a stronger cooperation between NATO and Russia. Of course, I think the latest developments in the relations between Russia and United States have shown that where there is a political goodwill bilaterally, results can be achieved. President of United States and President of Russia were able together to change the course of the tragic perspective of preemptive strike against Syria to the perspective of obliging Syria to join the International Convention against Chemical Weapons, to impose to Syria to destroy chemical arsenal, and then to ask for a political solution rather than a military one. This has been a good example after difficult moments in the US-Russia relations. So we need more cooperation and open-minded approach from the Russian Federation. This is something that I have to recognize. The final point, I've been for 4 years European Vice President and Commissioner for, as Mark said, security, justice, and fundamental rights. In that capacity, I decided to propose and to launch the European Agency for Fundamental Rights, which is based in Vienna. And one of my main priorities was exactly how to strike the right balance between security, prevention and reaction, and full respect of fundamental rights. I think the absolutely rights of human beings are non-negotiable. I think terrorism can be fought by respecting human rights. We believe this is the achievement of our democracies. This is extremely important. I remember many times the President of the United States, President Obama, the main leaders of Europe, reaffirming how important it is to strike that right balance. What sometimes in practice doesn't work is the open international cooperation on that. How to exchange information among partners. In some cases, there are some problems that I would say undermine the credibility of our common efforts to balance. But I believe that it's not possible that in the name of fighting crimes, we can sacrifice human rights. That would be, I would say, giving up our tradition, our history. I just said transatlantic alliance is based on common values, and these common values are human rights and rule of law. How can we give up of that? That would be betraying our history. For an European, that wouldn't be possible. Thank you.